first time I realized I could bring an entire $1 million project to a screeching halt with just a raised eyebrow, I was elbow deep in someone else's mess. Not metaphorically, literal mess. A junior vendor forgot to redact client data in a shared folder and posted it on a collaborative platform with zero security. I didn't scream, didn't huff. Just opened my oh hell no folder, pulled the client's MSA clause on third-party data exposure. CC'd the right 3 people. 10 minutes later, the folder was gone, the vendor was on a call with legal, and I was offered a discretionary bonus. I didn't take it. I just asked for the next version of my rate card to reflect the value of preemptive legal disasters avoided. They agreed I wasn't flashy. I didn't need to be. I was Shirley McKinnon, third-party compliance whisperer, vendor integration therapist, and the last stop before a lawsuit. Officially, I was a consultant. Contracted, freelance, off payroll. But unofficially, I was the human firewall between Nexera systems and the kind of regulatory landmine that turns board members into job seekers. If you're new here, first off, welcome to the world where middle-aged women in sensible shoes run the show while everybody else plays musical chairs with job titles. Second, before we dive deeper, go ahead and tap that like button and hit subscribe. Yeah, you. 90% of folks who listen to these stories never subscribe, and trust me, it keeps our little storytelling operation fueled, like caffeine for the content soul. And nothing motivates my team more than watching those numbers tick up while we spill the juiciest office revenge tales this side of the Mississippi. Anyway, back to the calm before the storm. At Nexora, I had a rhythm. Monday mornings, I filtered through integration reports with black coffee and classical cello. By noon, I'd already flagged 4 systems for API misfires, rejected 2 vendor scopes for lack of encryption specificity, and greenlit one glorious unicorn of a proposal that actually followed the damn protocol. My inbox was a color-coded masterpiece. I kept copies of everything: rate cards, emails, redline PDFs, client notes. Hell, I even had a flash drive in my purse with my original contract scanned 3 different ways. Not paranoia, practice. Clients loved me. I didn't talk much, but when I did, it was with receipts. My name was quietly baked into at least 3 MSAs with major accounts, language I'd personally helped insert during a time when the legal team still knew the difference between a loophole and a backdoor. Those MSAs, dusty and unassuming, contained a beautiful clause, rare, handcrafted gem, that all vendor-related compliance decisions required my explicit sign-off. Not optional, not recommendation, required. And I never weaponized it. Not until I had to. That had to moment began brewing the day Bradley Pierce oozed his way into the CEO seat with a PowerPoint, a grin too white for someone who never closed their own deals, and the charisma of a sock full of mayonnaise. Bradley was the kind of interim hire the board loved. Cheap, overconfident, and blissfully ignorant of how the company actually worked. He used phrases like synergistic realignment and non-essential spend review. Translation: cut anyone who wasn't loud or pretty enough for LinkedIn selfies. I watched it all happen like a slow-motion train derailment. One day I was on a client call reviewing vendor encryption protocols. The next, I was told that all third-party communications would now flow through the new operations lead, a 24-year-old named Chase who thought GDPR was a dating app. Bradley didn't fire me, that would have taken spine. No, he did what cowards do, he tried to erase me with policy. Reassigned accounts, stalled invoice approvals, added me to a generic contractor pool, and told HR to standardize her hours. I brought up the clause once. He laughed like I told him I was Queen of England. We don't renegotiate legacy sweetheart deals, he said, using that tone men reserve for women who remind them of their mother, smart enough to kill them in court but too classy to raise her voice. I didn't argue, I didn't yell, I just stopped signing things. Vendor milestone approvals, paused, security assessments, unacknowledged, encryption audits, no sign-off. If my name didn't appear on a document, that document didn't exist as far as compliance was concerned. And the clock was ticking, because a quarterly audit from one of our biggest international clients was scheduled in 6 weeks. I watched Bradley dance. He pushed proposals forward without me, redirected reports to junior staff, told the client we were optimizing workflows. He was trying to bury my role under jargon and committee, but you can't bury a landmine and pretend it's mulch. So I started digging in, quietly, strategically. I updated my rate card, triple-checked my clause renewals, flagged every change in project scope where my sign-off was missing. I labeled each file with timestamps, pulled the original binders from legal archive storage, and bookmarked paragraph 8.1 like it was scripture. Because I wasn't just planning to stop a train, I was building the track that would send it off a cliff. And Bradley was already whistling at the edge. Bradley Pierce walked into the building like a man who thought deodorant was optional if your ego was loud enough. Fresh from some tech-adjacent disruption lab in Austin, he arrived with a recycled Ted Lasso mustache, startup sneakers, and a folder full of buzzwords so dense they gave the legal team migraines. He wore confidence like cologne, too strong, covering something rotten, and came armed with a mandate from the board: cut costs, increase margins, and streamline vendor oversight. Translation: fire the people who make things work and replace them with people who make things pretty. On day 2, he called me Susan. Twice. On day 3, he asked if I could compile a simplified digest of all current third-party engagement SOPs, preferably in infographic form, which is executive speak for I have no idea what you do, but I want a colorful PDF about it. I sent him a 4-page Word doc titled Things That Will Get Us Sued, and he didn't even open it. Within a week, my calendar went from booked solid to eerily empty. Standing Tuesday encryption reviews, reassigned to Chase, the same intern-turned-ops lead who once asked if two-factor authentication meant calling someone twice. Weekly compliance briefings, canceled or moved to times when I was conveniently double-booked. Project milestone approvals, stuff that had always required my sign-off, were suddenly being funneled through new chain-of-command protocols. I emailed Bradley once, maybe twice. Nothing aggressive, just a gentle paper trail-style nudge. Per MSA Clause 8.1, signatory authority for vendor compliance remains in effect until explicitly revoked. His reply? A screenshot of my original contract with a giant red X drawn over it in Microsoft Paint. The caption read, "We don't renegotiate legacy sweetheart deals." I stared at it for a long minute, not angry, just deeply amused. This man, who probably thought GDPR was a wrapper and thought a SOX audit was something HR handled when your feet smelled, had no idea what he'd just done. He didn't know that legacy sweetheart deal came with more legal teeth than a class action lawsuit sponsored by the IRS. I didn't hit reply. I didn't call HR. I didn't call legal. I just stopped signing compliance reports, stopped reviewing third-party integration requests, stopped approving milestone triggers. Every request that needed my signature sat in my inbox like a digital ghost, seen, acknowledged, and untouched. And things started to slow down, not immediately, but noticeably. The first missed milestone got blamed on workflow realignment. The second was an unfortunate delay in vendor response. By the third, one of the clients asked in a call, "Hey, wasn't Shirley supposed to sign off on this?" Bradley laughed. "Oh, Shirley's taking a step back from project delivery. We're evolving her role." That was the first time I heard him use the word evolving like a threat. Cute. Meanwhile, Chase, the poor kid, was drowning. One compliance doc came back flagged for conflicting encryption protocols. Another had a vendor listed that wasn't even on the approved database. I saw the emails. I just didn't intervene, not my circus, not anymore. I went quiet, but I didn't go still. Behind the scenes, I updated my folder system, created a new directory, Pierce Fallout, subfolders labeled by date, internal vs, external, directives without signatures, emails with red lines ignored, anything traceable, anything deniable, my own little museum of future regrets. I also called a notary, had them witness the newest version of my rate card, clean, crisp, notarized in blue ink with a certified timestamp. I placed it in my lockbox next to the hard copy of the original MSA with paragraph 8.1 circled in red. Above it, I taped a sticky note with 2 words, "Watch him." Bradley, meanwhile, was on a mission. He held weekly synergy summits where half the room was interns taking notes for a deck nobody would read. He unveiled a new vendor optimization workflow model that included 5 steps, 0 logic, and a lot of hexagons. He talked about flattening hierarchies, which basically meant pulling experienced people off decision-making roles so he could replace them with sycophants and yes men. My favorite moment came during a Friday town hall when he said, "We're not just changing how we do things, we're changing who does them." That was his big finale. No applause, just a coughing fit from someone in legal and a blinking Teams screen. In private, people started whispering, "Did you see who approved the Acme vendor deal? Wasn't that supposed to go through Shirley? I thought Shirley handled vendor encryption. Has anyone seen the updated compliance doc from her?" I didn't answer. I just walked a little slower through the halls. Let the silence grow fat around me. You don't need to shout when the walls are already leaning. Bradley still hadn't figured it out. Still thought he could outmaneuver someone who'd been writing the rules while he was still learning how to spell procurement. But the quarterly client audit was coming. One of our biggest international contracts. A compliance microscope with teeth and subpoenas. And the best part? They still thought I was in charge, because technically, I was. Bradley had just removed the only person who knew how to pass their inspection. The first thing I did that Monday morning, before even brewing my usual mug of death before decaf, was print out a copy of the latest integration proposal, the one Chase had so proudly uploaded to the internal portal titled Phase Roman 2, Streamlined Compliance Handoff. Just reading the name made my eyelid twitch. It was written like a BuzzFeed listicle for auditors, missing half the encryption protocols, citing 2 unapproved vendors, and using language so vague it could have been a horoscope. I sat down, pulled out my red pen, and began the ritual, line by line, box by box. I marked every deviation, every missed requirement, every glittering oversight masquerading as innovation. When I was done, it looked like the aftermath of a printer murder scene. I scanned it, saved it as Integration Proposal Carnage V3 Redline Final, and quietly uploaded it into the shared compliance folder. No announcement. No email. Just placed it there. A silent grenade with the pin already pulled. Then I opened my inbox and saw Bradley's latest passive-aggressive masterpiece. Subject, next steps for Shirley's role evolution body. Let's revisit how your skills might serve in an advisory-only capacity, off-client-facing operations. Please refrain from direct vendor communication until we complete this transition. Appreciate your understanding. The all revisit your role maneuver. Corporate speak for, kindly walk yourself to the guillotine so I don't have to get my hands dirty. I didn't reply. Instead, I began crafting what I like to call the silent wall. Every file he moved forward without me, I duplicated it, labeled it, logged the timestamp. Every vendor proposal submitted without my approval, I created a mirrored version with my original commentary attached. It wasn't sabotage, it was insurance. Because Bradley wasn't just cutting corners, he was paving a regulatory slip-and-slide with no helmet and a pocket full of liability. The next day, he called me. First time he'd done that since he evolved my role. "Hey ye Shirley," he began, in that sing-song tone men use when they think charm might soften the blade. "Listen, we need to be flexible on the sign-off for that integration proposal. Client's expecting delivery next week, and frankly, it's above your rate band now." I blinked. Above my what? Your rate band. We've pooled all our contractor rates and standardized compensation tiers. Compliance input is Tier 2 now. You're billing like Tier 1. That won't fly with finance. Let that hang in the air like a fart in a boardroom. Then, so you're saying I don't get paid unless I sign off at a discount? He laughed. "Come on, Shirley. Don't make this a thing. Just sign the doc so we can move, or I'll have to escalate this and get you removed from the project altogether." There it was. The threat. Unwrapped, blunt, and clumsy. I smiled. Not because it was funny, though it was pathetic, but because he'd just walked into a trap I'd set years ago. "Okay," I said, as calm as ever. "Give me a minute." I opened my laptop, found the clause, and wrote, "Subject, integration proposal, signature pending body. Per clause 6.3 of the Master Services Agreement, my sign-off is a precondition for milestone completion on all vendor-facing integrations impacting compliance metrics." I attached the PDF, circled the clause, no fluff, no emoji, no explanation. Then I hit send, and waited. 20 minutes, then 30, then a full hour. I imagined Bradley in his glass office, pacing in circles, trying to decipher the clause like it was ancient scripture. Maybe he pinged legal. Maybe he asked Chase. Maybe he Googled clause 6.3 MSA. Can I ignore it? I don't know what he did, but I do know what he didn't do. Reply. The next day, the project stalled. Chase sent a harried Teams message asking if I had feedback on the proposal. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded him the same clause, no text, just a PDF, like a ghost delivering a court order. That week, 2 other teams pinged me about pending compliance reports. I told them politely I was unavailable until my compensation structure was resolved. That's it. No drama, no press release. Just quiet, contractual resistance. And beneath it all, I kept building. I archived every meeting invite I was excluded from, pulled backup copies of the proposal revisions, created a timeline of approvals I'd been cut from. I found old Slack threads where I'd personally outlined vendor protocols, threads now attributed to team decisions in Bradley's presentations. I flagged discrepancies in timestamps, saved Chase's edit history on shared docs. Every piece of evidence fed the machine, a machine with no brakes and only one destination. Because Bradley thought this was a power struggle. But he didn't know, I already won the moment I wrote clause 6.3. The first clue was the meeting that didn't exist, at least not on my calendar. Friday morning, 9 a.m. sharp, and I'm doing my usual ritual. Coffee brewed strong enough to strip paint, inbox cleared, notes ready for my biweekly call with the client's risk and compliance team. Except nothing. No invite, no call. Just a ghost town silence where a Zoom link should have been. I checked the shared calendars. Bradley had set up a third-party integration alignment review with the client's audit team. Private event, restricted access. Attendees, Bradley, Chase, one of our junior analysts named Lauren, poor thing still thought ISO was a department, and 2 compliance advisors I'd never met, no Shirley. I stared at the screen for a full minute, not mad, just aware. It was official, he was trying to push me out in real time. Not through HR, not through process, but by rewriting the narrative altogether. He wanted to erase me from the story, so I did what I do best. I listened, not with ears, with files, folders, timestamps, metadata. Every breadcrumb leaves a trail if you know how to read it. By noon, I had my answer. Bradley had drafted a new compliance report, glossy formatting, tables that looked like they were built in PowerPoint hell, vendor assessments filled with vague, padded language like generally aligned with best practices and sufficient encryption posture with no citations, no source material, and most damning, no version history. He sent it to the client ahead of the meeting. Didn't even bother to ask me for review. He had Lauren send it. Lauren, who once asked me if a SOC2 type Roman 2 was a Wi-Fi router. God bless her, she meant well. So now a compliance report, one that legally required my sign-off per the Master Services Agreement, had just been submitted under my project name without my review, without my signature, and without even a cursory check from someone who understood the difference between tokenization and encryption. That's not a mistake. That's malpractice. The meeting happened. I wasn't in it. But I know exactly what went down because 5 minutes after the call ended, I got a ping from one of the client's senior compliance officers. "Hey Shirley, did you submit this new compliance update?" That was the entire message. I stared at it, then typed back, "No. I was not consulted on this revision." 15 seconds later, understood. Stand by. Turns out the report was a Frankenstein of recycled data from old audits, fake summaries from new vendors Bradley had fast-tracked, and a few flashy acronyms sprinkled in for effect. One section referenced a proprietary sandbox environment that didn't exist. Another claimed full tokenized encryption, even though the vendor in question had failed our last security review for lacking key management rotation. It was a compliance piñata, and the client was about to swing hard. I didn't confront Bradley. That would have been too kind. Instead, I opened a fresh email to the client's external legal team, the ones who originally drafted the MSAs with us. I kept it surgical. Subject, Compliance Sign-Off Authority Clarification Dear Redacted, please see attached, my original consulting contract with Nexera Systems and the active MSA with client, highlighting clause 6.3 and paragraph 8.1. As outlined, compliance milestone documentation requires my direct review and signature to be valid under audit conditions. I was not consulted on the most recent submission dated X. Please advise if you require my formal version for review. Best, Shirley McKinnon. No threats, no emotion, just a scalpel dipped in ink. 5 minutes later, I got the read receipt. 10 minutes after that, Bradley's assistant forwarded me a frantic invite to a Clarity Sync meeting scheduled for 2 p.m. I declined because the damage was already done. At 2:04 p.m., I got another ping from the client's lead auditor. Was this report ever reviewed by the designated compliance liaison? That was the language from the MSA. Designated compliance liaison was me. In every version, every contract renewal, every deal signed since 2019. Bradley's response, per internal chat screenshots someone kindly leaked to me later, was, "Shirley's role is under redefinition. She's not necessary anymore." That single sentence was the bullet he fired into his own foot. Because while he was redefining roles and restructuring optics, I was building a chronological log of every time he bypassed legal protocol. I had a side-by-side comparison of the submitted report versus the last validated one. I had vendor flags, discrepancy notes, timestamps, and now I had the client's legal attention. Bradley didn't know it yet, but clause 6.3 wasn't just a gate, it was a fuse. And he just lit it. You could feel it in the elevators, tight smiles, rapid blinking, people pretending to check Slack while sweating through their collars. Word had gotten out. This quarter's client audit wasn't your usual box-checking bake sale. It was going to be a full-body cavity search with spreadsheets. Regulatory scrutiny was up. The client's legal team had flagged vendor inconsistencies in the last submission, and the word breach had been whispered just loudly enough to make its way through the floor like carbon monoxide. And me, I was the oxygen sensor, quiet, blinking red. The irony was delicious. 3 weeks ago, I was one role evolution away from being erased. Now, I was the reason the building hadn't caught fire yet. I didn't strut. I didn't gloat. I did something much worse. I got very, very organized. I pulled out the latest draft of my rate card, cleaned it up, recalibrated for the current scope creep, tacked on the late approval penalties written into the original deal but never enforced. Then I walked it across the street to my notary. The same guy who notarized my divorce papers and asked me deadpan, "Same guy screwing you again?" I laughed, signed the document, and said, "Different guy, same smell." Stamped, signed, dated. By the time I returned to the office, word had started to bubble. Not full-on gossip, yet but a shift in tone. People I hadn't heard from in weeks started forwarding for visibility emails. Legal requested a casual touch base. HR scheduled a contractor re-engagement review, which I declined with one line, "Please consult the MSA and refer questions to client counsel." Bradley, meanwhile, was losing altitude. Chase had gone silent after a vendor he'd greenlit accidentally exposed a sandbox environment to live traffic. Lauren had been reassigned to internal metrics, which was executive speak for sit in a corner until we forget you exist. And Bradley? He was doing laps, calling impromptu syncs, rescheduling calendar blocks, and cornering anyone with a pulse and access to a PDF. It was around 4:12 p.m. when he finally came for me. Cornered me by the second-floor coffee machine like a raccoon in a Brooks Brothers suit. "Shirley," he said, like I'd forgotten my own name, "I need you to explain this." He held up my notarized rate card like it was radioactive. "This is extortion." I didn't blink. "It's a contract. You're hijacking deliverables in the middle of an audit," he hissed, voice low but shaking. "You're submitting documentation under my name without approval. Let's not play the outrage violin." He straightened, tried a new angle. "You really want to blow up the relationship with one of our biggest clients over a pay bump?" And that's when I saw it, not confidence, not leadership, but panic. The kind that leaks around the edges when someone realizes they've built a house on gas lines and someone else holds the match. I smiled, small, quiet. This isn't about a pay bump, Bradley. This is about compliance. And compliance isn't a suggestion, it's a signature. He opened his mouth, closed it, spun on his heel, and walked off without a word. That night, I declined 3 more meeting invites and got a message from one of the client's compliance directors. Are you signing the new audit packet? My reply, not in its current form. Awaiting correct rate confirmation per clause 6.3. The next morning, the audit prep call was delayed. No one had the right version of the compliance report. The integration milestone approvals were frozen. Vendor summaries were stale. And for the first time, the phrase "we need Shirley's approval" started echoing in meetings again, this time not as an afterthought, but as a roadblock. People noticed. Someone in finance CC'd me by accident on an email with the subject line, "What happens if Shirley doesn't sign?" The thread was 6 messages deep and growing longer by the hour. In the kitchen, someone had written the enforcer in dry erase marker next to my mug. I erased it without comment. In the elevator, an intern whispered to her friend, "I heard she sued NASA once." I didn't correct her. It was working. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was a problem. And problems like me don't get fixed, they get feared. Audit day arrived like a cold front, quiet at first, then chilling everyone to the bone. By 8 a.m., the conference room on the 19th floor was packed. Not coffee and pastries packed, this was legal counsel. Vendor risk and 3 people who probably carry subpoenas in their briefcases packed. The client had brought their entire compliance cavalry. And not just Zoom squares this time, no, they flew in. Real people, real suits, real consequences. There were nameplates, water bottles lined up like sentries, and printed copies of the compliance report stacked neatly in front of each chair. Not Bradley's version. Mine, the one I hadn't signed. Someone had leaked it to the client. Probably Chase, who hadn't made eye contact with me since Monday. Bradley was already there, pacing, smoothing his tie like it owed him money. He greeted the client team with fake warmth and slide deck confidence, trying to command the room with phrases like strategic realignment and agile compliance scaffolding. It was like watching a possum try to do Shakespeare. I walked in last. No announcement. No folder. Just me and a copy of my contract in my bag. The one with the original wet signature, dated, notarized, and quietly terrifying. Bradley noticed me, blinked once, kept talking, and we've consolidated our compliance operations into a collaborative structure, pulling in Shirley's legacy insights as part of a broader team effort. He said it like I was a spirit guide, like I had gently whispered best practices into the ears of a bunch of 24-year-olds before fading into the mist. I said nothing. Just sat down. No smile, no nod. The audit began. They opened with basic verification, vendor lists, system documentation, encryption protocols. I knew every answer. So did Bradley. But only one of us had earned the right to speak. He tried to keep control, deflecting questions, spinning gaps as transitional friction. But the client team wasn't buying it. You could see it in the lead auditor's face, a tall, older man with eyes like cold steel and zero patience for theater. Then came the stumble. Lauren, poor, sweet, unqualified Lauren, was asked to walk through vendor 4 encryption compliance. She froze, mumbled something about AES 256 in sandbox environments. Wrong answer. Vendor 4 had failed the last encryption review for not rotating their keys and storing credentials in plain text in a shared dev repo. I didn't speak. I just shifted in my chair. Subtle, barely audible. But the lead auditor caught it like a hawk. He raised an eyebrow, then calmly, deliberately looked directly at me. "Miss McKinnon, were you the designated compliance liaison for this vendor review?" I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, Bradley cut in with a laugh. "Let's not get bogged down in titles. Shirley's involvement was more historical context. She wasn't central to the final review." I didn't move. The lead auditor did. "Was this submission reviewed by the designated compliance liaison as defined in paragraph 8.1 of our master services agreement?" Bradley chuckled, but it was thinner now. "That clause is outdated. We've restructured since then." The room shifted. One of the client's legal reps looked up, flipped through a binder. "The clause was renewed in the last addendum," she said flatly. "It's still valid." Bradley went pale. "Well, it's functionally obsolete. The project team collectively owns compliance now." "Is that documented?" the auditor asked. Bradley stammered. "We're working on a new engagement charter. Is it signed?" No answer. The room was dead quiet now. No phones, no typing. Just the soft hum of expensive HVAC and the sound of Bradley realizing he'd stepped into quicksand with roller skates. I leaned forward, just enough to be heard. "If you'd like, I can provide the original clause." "It's in my bag." The lead auditor nodded once. "Please." I reached down, no flourish, no drama. Just slid the contract across the table like a poker hand. He took it, flipped to the tab. "Read aloud. All third-party compliance documentation must be reviewed and signed by the designated compliance liaison prior to submission. No exceptions." He set it down, folded his hands, and looked directly at Bradley. The silence that followed was magnificent. I didn't gloat, didn't smile. I just sat there, the quiet weight of the room finally shifting back in my direction. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel erased. I felt inevitable. There's a silence that lives just past panic, where even breathing sounds suspicious. That's what filled the room after the clause was read aloud. Nobody moved, nobody blinked. You could hear the tap of a pen cap hitting the table like gunfire in a monastery. Bradley's eyes were flicking back and forth like he was trying to read subtitles on a foreign horror film, one where the monster was legally binding and wore orthotic shoes. I didn't rush. From my bag, I pulled out 2 folders, one plain, one navy leather. I opened the leather one first, inside my updated rate card, notarized, embossed with the sweet perfume of finality. Then from the plain folder, the contract addendum, the one with the clause re-upped during the last renewal cycle. Signed, sealed, quiet. I slid them across the table, one after the other. Notarized last week, I said calmly. Updated compensation aligned with vendor risk scope increase and milestone impact. See addendum line 12 for rate applicability under active compliance scenarios. The lead auditor took it. Didn't even glance at Bradley. Just read aloud like he was conducting last rites. Her signature is required per paragraph 8.1 of the Master Services Agreement. Failure to obtain said signature prior to milestone completion constitutes breach of protocol and may void contractual guarantees. He didn't need to raise his voice. He just looked across the table at the client's legal rep, who had already begun rifling through a thick white binder. I watched her flip, stop, flip again, run her finger down the margin, and then freeze. She looked up. It's here, she said, page 42. Addendum 3. Clause was renewed twice, no changes. Active and enforceable. Then, without lifting her eyes from the binder, she added, "You signed this version, Bradley." Bradley looked like someone had poured cold gravy down his spine. He sputtered, "Wait, no, that can't still be binding. That was a legacy clause. It was supposed to sunset." "No sunset language appears in the contract," the lawyer replied, voice calm as an autopsy. "And you initialed the clause during the last signature round. See here." She turned the binder. His initials, big and clumsy, stared back at him like graffiti on a confession. Across the room, someone stifled a cough. Someone else shifted their chair just slightly, the plastic feet screeching against tile like a warning shot. Bradley opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again, this time with less air behind the words. "Okay, but we've been operating under the assumption that Shirley was no longer critical to the process." The lead auditor tilted his head. "Is there an amendment on file that removes her from the signatory role?" Bradley looked like he'd swallowed a stapler. "No. Then your assumption is irrelevant." God, the sound of that word, irrelevant, cut through the air like ice through whiskey. I didn't say a word, just folded my hands, watched the ripples expand in the silence like someone had dropped a stone into the center of a very expensive pond. One of the vendor risk analysts on the client side leaned toward her colleague and whispered something I couldn't quite catch, but it ended with, "Told you she was the firewall." Damn right I was. Bradley sat back, all his posture gone, hair slightly damp, shirt collar suddenly too tight. The lead auditor closed the contract and placed it back on the table with care, like it was evidence in a criminal trial, which in many ways it now was. "We'll need a new compliance submission," he said, "reviewed and signed per the agreement." He looked at me. "Can you provide that within 48 hours? I nodded once. "Of course." Then finally, Bradley spoke again. But this time his voice had changed. Smaller, cracked at the edges. This is going to delay everything." The client's legal rep didn't miss a beat. "Yes, because you bypassed your own MSA." Bradley looked at me then, really looked like a man trying to spot the snare after it snapped shut around his ankle. For a second, I almost felt bad for him. Almost. But then I remembered the paint screenshot. The condescension, the passive-aggressive demotion, the disrespect. This wasn't revenge. This was gravity. Finally doing its job. And I was the ground. The audit paused like someone had pulled the emergency brake on a train halfway over a canyon. One minute we were knee-deep in documentation reviews. The next, the lead auditor was standing, closing his laptop with that silent finality only auditors and judges seem to master. "This review cannot proceed," he announced, "until we receive a valid compliance submission signed by Miss McKinnon as required." He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The words detonated in that conference room with the subtlety of a controlled demolition. The client team nodded. One of their legal reps snapped the binder shut, slid it into her bag, and stood up like she'd just watched someone void a lease by breathing wrong. "Bradley?" He flinched, then quickly tried to regroup. Let's not overcorrect here," he said. Voice brittle, "There's clearly been confusion around roles and process ownership. I'll sync with legal and resubmit with corrected documentation. We'll get everything squared away." No one moved. Then the client's SVP of compliance, a sharp-dressed woman who hadn't said much all day, spoke. "We won't accept any corrected documentation unless it comes directly from Miss McKinnon." With her signature. Bradley's mouth opened. What came out was less of a sentence and more of a wheeze. "Well, legal approved the restructure, so I mean, technically we're within operational discretion, right?" He turned toward our internal legal counsel, Derek, a man who usually avoided conflict with the grace of a veteran tightrope walker. "Not this time." Derek cleared his throat, straightened his glasses, and delivered the slow, lethal blow. No restructuring of Miss McKinnon's role was ever documented. There's no paper trail, no amendment, no board approval. Furthermore, you initialed the latest version of her rate card and contract clause. So if this was a misunderstanding, it's one you created and signed. You could feel the heat draining from Bradley's skin. He looked like someone had swapped out his blood with Diet Coke. His hands twitched toward his laptop, then away. Like he wanted to pull up a defense but knew the evidence was already stacked against him in neat, time-stamped folders. He tried one last Hail Mary. I was operating under board directives to cut costs. This was all in good faith, a short silence. Then the client's general counsel raised her eyebrow and said the phrase every executive dreads will be documenting that position formally, for our board. And just like that, the power dynamic shifted so hard it could have cracked a rib. I didn't say a word, just sipped from my water bottle. I wasn't gloating. I was absorbing, watching the scaffolding Bradley built collapse under its own dishonesty. They cleared the room after that. Audit table vacated. Client team gone. Vendor calls canceled. Even Chase disappeared, probably melted into a stairwell somewhere. I was halfway back to my desk when my phone buzzed. Unknown number, I answered. Miss McKinnon, this is Lorna Kessler, SVP of Compliance at Cordair Group. Cordair, the client. Yes, I said. I'm going to skip the corporate nonsense. We want to bring you in-house, direct hire, full benefits. You'll manage all future compliance initiatives tied to this account, and you'll have final say over external staffing. Name your start date. She didn't even wait for me to respond. We've already sent over the offer to your personal email. Bradley's behavior has triggered a review on our end, and frankly, we want to ensure that never happens again. I stood there in the hallway, fluorescent lights flickering overhead like some divine applause track, and felt something I hadn't felt in years: power, clean and earned. By noon, Bradley was gone, placed on executive leave pending internal investigation of contract irregularities and failure to disclose legal risk to the board. In English, he got booted so fast his chair was still warm. The hallway was strangely quiet that afternoon. People avoided eye contact, unsure if I was radioactive or royalty. I walked past Bradley's office. Door shut, no nameplate, just a limp fern and a dark screen. The intern who once asked if I still worked here scurried out of my way like I was armed. Back at my desk, I opened the offer email from Cordair. 6 figures. Stock options. Remote friendly. And a bullet point I reread 3 times just to let it land. All compliance staffing decisions will fall under your discretion. Non-negotiable. I sat back. Let it wash over me. I didn't burn bridges. I just let the ones built on ego and ignorance collapse under their own weight. And I walked across the ashes without even smudging my shoes. The boardroom always smelled like fresh leather and cheap panic. That morning, it was especially thick with both. They'd called an emergency meeting, 9 a.m. sharp, no breakfast, no small talk. Just 14 chairs filled with people who suddenly realized they hadn't actually been paying attention to how the company ran, only that it seemed like it was running. You could feel the fear vibrating in the upholstery. I was escorted in through the side door. No fanfare, no badge check. The chairwoman nodded once as I entered, not out of politeness but necessity. I was no longer an afterthought. I was evidence. Bradley, of course, wasn't there. HR had confirmed his administrative leave the day prior. Rumor was he tried to file a counterclaim citing role ambiguity and unauthorized contract manipulation. The irony? The clause he was trying to erase was the one that handcuffed him to every reckless decision he made. Across the table sat the client's general counsel, the Cordair SVP who'd made me the job offer, and 2 external auditors, one of whom had flown in from Geneva. When auditors cross oceans, it's not for the snacks. The chairwoman opened the meeting with a tight-lipped statement about concerns raised regarding vendor oversight and potential exposure due to unauthorized sign-off protocols. Translation: we almost tanked a multimillion-dollar account because a guy with PowerPoint skills and mommy issues thought he understood risk management. Then the lead auditor spoke. He didn't look at his notes. He didn't have to. Your consultant, Miss McKinnon, protected your compliance standing. He said it like a doctor delivering test results. Calm, clinical, irreversible. She documented inconsistencies in vendor encryption protocols that were submitted under invalid authority. She withheld signature until her contractually defined compensation structure was restored, per Clause 6.3 of the Master Services Agreement. At no point did she breach protocol. In fact, she enforced it. The room stayed dead quiet. A couple board members shifted uncomfortably, like their chairs had just grown thorns. Your interim CEO, the auditor continued, circumvented documentation policies, misrepresented operational changes, and ignored legal counsel. Had the client accepted the last compliance submission, this company would be facing breach penalties and loss of accreditation. Someone at the far end of the table coughed. Sound of a man choking on his stock options. Per the MSA, the auditor finished, looking directly at the chairwoman. Miss McKinnon holds signatory authority on all vendor compliance documentation. He leaned back. Pay the woman. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. No one asked me to speak. No one asked me to explain. I wasn't there for performance. I was there because the paper trail ended at my feet, and the only way forward was through me. The chairwoman nodded once more. We'll be issuing retroactive compensation adjustments and revisiting contractor oversight procedures. I already knew that. I'd seen the draft resolution the night before, courtesy of a sympathetic lawyer who quietly thanked me for not letting them sink the ship with their own ego. I stood, collected my folder. No smirk, no dramatics, just business. As I turned to leave, one of the board members, one of the few who hadn't spoken, leaned slightly forward and said, "You were never on the org chart, were you?" I paused, then smiled just enough. I never needed to be, and with that I stepped out of the room, down the hall, past the glass offices, past Bradley's dark door, past the intern who nodded at me like I was the ghost of Christmas comeuppance. Outside, the sunlight felt earned. I opened my folder. On the front, stamped in silver, next phase proposal. The future was mine to architect now, and all I'd done was follow the rules. To the letter. You're the real MVPs of the office jungle. Thanks for watching. Smash that subscribe button, or the coffee pot might just forget your next brew.